A woman said the same words Pope John Paul II turned to again and again in his own unbearable suffering. She had been in pain for 11 years. She had prayed every prayer she knew. And then Father Thomas Barrett told her about one sentence, rooted in the words of Christ on the cross, that John Paul II believed could carry a soul through suffering that feels too heavy to bear alone. Margaret Sullivan was 67 years old. She lived in Columbus, Ohio. She had been suffering with nerve pain in her back and legs for 11 years. The pain woke her at night. The pain stopped her from standing through an entire Mass. The pain made her stop leading the altar guild at St. Catherine Church because she could no longer hold her arms steady long enough to iron the linens. She had seen 14 doctors. She had prayed novenas to every saint whose name she knew. She had been to Lourdes. She had been to Knock. She had made a pilgrimage to the National Shrine in Washington and touched the relics of Blessed Carlo Acutis and Mother Teresa and returned home with the same pain. Her daughter drove her to daily Mass when the pain allowed it. When the pain did not allow it, Margaret stayed home and prayed the rosary alone in her living room with her hands shaking from the medication she took that never fully worked. She feared that God had stopped listening. She feared that her prayers were wrong somehow, that something in the way she spoke to him had closed the door between them. Father Thomas Barrett was a hospital chaplain at Mount Carmel Hospital in Columbus. He had been a priest for 32 years. He had sat with over 700 people in unbearable suffering. He had learned something from John Paul II's apostolic letter on suffering, Salvifici Doloris, published in 1984, that suffering united to the suffering of Christ on the cross can become redemptive, a form of participation in Christ's own offering rather than simply a loss to be endured. Father Barrett encountered this teaching in seminary, but he did not understand its full weight until he watched what happened in people who stopped asking God only to remove their pain and began asking Him to be present within it. You have prayed through pain that has not stopped. You have carried suffering so long that you wonder if you are meant to carry it forever. You have asked God for healing and the healing has not come, and you fear that the problem is not the pain, but something broken in the way you pray. You have been faithful. You have been obedient. You have done everything the church asked. And still you wake at night feeling that your prayers are hitting a wall between you and heaven, that God hears everyone else, but He has stopped hearing you. The error is not your faithfulness. The error is that no one ever showed you the difference between asking God to remove your suffering and offering it to Him in the words Christ spoke when His own suffering reached its limit. John Paul II believed there is a moment when the soul can stop asking only for relief and instead cry out in surrender, echoing what Christ said on the cross. That cry is not a guarantee that the pain will end. It is a way of placing what you cannot carry alone into the hands of God. Father Barrett was 59 years old when he first began to see what this kind of prayer could do in the people he served. He had been assigned to the oncology ward at Mount Carmel Hospital for 6 years. He prayed with patients every day. He anointed the sick. He held their hands when they were afraid. But something began to trouble him in the 4th year of his assignment. He noticed that the patients who prayed the most, the ones who never missed the rosary, the ones who had statues of Mary beside their hospital beds, were often the ones who seemed most tormented by the question of why God had not answered them. He could see it in their eyes when he entered the room. They were faithful, they were suffering, and they could not understand why their faithfulness had not stopped the suffering. One night in October of 2011, Father Barrett sat alone in the hospital chapel at 2 in the morning. He had just left the room of a woman named Dorothy, who had been praying the same novena for 63 days, asking God to take away her pain so that she could go home and see her grandchildren one more time. The pain had not lessened. Dorothy had looked at him and said, "Father, does God hear me?" He did not know how to answer her. He sat in the chapel and opened his breviary, and then found himself thinking back to a passage he had first read in seminary from Salvifici Doloris, about suffering united to the cross of Christ. And he thought of the words Christ spoke on the cross when his suffering reached its limit, words that expressed complete trust in the Father, even though the pain did not stop. Father Barrett returned to Dorothy's room the next morning. He told her about that passage. He told her there was a different way to pray that she had not yet tried, not because she did not know the words, but because she had been taught to ask God to take away her pain, instead of placing that pain into his hands with the same words Christ used. Dorothy looked at him and said, "I have been asking God to fix me, Father. I have never asked him to simply be with me in what I cannot fix." Father Barrett began to share this way of praying with patients who told him they felt their prayers were not reaching heaven. Over the following months, he noticed something similar happen again and again, not always physical healing, but almost always a spiritual shift, a sense that God had not been absent, but had been waiting for them to stop asking him only to remove the cross and to start asking him to help them carry it. One of those patients was a man named Richard Donnelly, 71 years old, from Dublin, Ohio. Richard had chronic pain from spinal stenosis. He had been unable to sleep more than 2 hours at a time for 4 years. He prayed the rosary every night. He attended daily mass when his body allowed. He had received the anointing of the sick 3 times. Nothing changed. Father Barrett visited him during a hospital stay in November of 2011 and shared this way of praying with him. Richard said the prayer that night before sleep. He did not claim the pain disappeared, but he later said that for the first time in 4 years, he felt less alone in it, and that this, more than anything, was what let him finally rest. Father Barrett knew he had to find Margaret Sullivan. He had heard about her suffering from another priest at St. Catherine. He called her daughter and asked if he could visit. Margaret agreed, though she told her daughter she did not know what one more priest could say that would make any difference. Father Barrett arrived at Margaret's home in Columbus on a Tuesday afternoon in early December. It was 2:15. Margaret was sitting in a chair near the window with a heating pad against her lower back. Father Barrett sat across from her. He did not ask about her pain. He asked instead, "Margaret, have you ever prayed the words Christ prayed when his suffering became too much to bear?" Margaret said, "Father, I have prayed to Christ about my suffering 1,000 times." Father Barrett said, "I am not asking if you have prayed to him. I am asking if you have prayed with him, using the same words he used when he reached the moment you are in right now, when the pain is so heavy you cannot carry it 1 more hour without help from heaven." Something in Margaret's face changed. She set down the rosary beads she had been holding. She said, "I do not know that prayer, Father." Father Barrett opened a small notebook and read her the passage from Salvifici Doloris about suffering united to Christ. Then he said, "Tonight, when the pain becomes unbearable again, do not only ask God to take it away. Say instead what Christ said on the cross when he could not bear it anymore. Speak it aloud. It will not erase the pain, but it may change how you carry it." Margaret said she would try. Father Barrett told her to say it before sleep, when the pain always worsened, and to expect that something might shift, not because the prayer was magic, but because it was an act of trust her heart had been waiting to make. If you recognize yourself in what you have just heard, then what you are about to receive was written for you. You have been faithful. You have carried suffering that felt unbearable. And tonight, you will learn a prayer of surrender that has helped many people carry what they could not carry alone. Margaret Sullivan went to bed that night at 10:30. The pain in her back was worse than it had been all day. She could not lie flat. She sat propped against 3 pillows, with her hands folded over the rosary. She thought about what Father Barrett had said. She thought about the moment on the cross when Christ could not carry it anymore. And then she said the words. She did not ask God to heal her. She did not ask him to take away the pain. She spoke a prayer of surrender, echoing the words Christ spoke from the cross. Her voice was quiet. Her hands were shaking. She said it once. Then she closed her eyes. The pain did not disappear. But something else happened. The fear that had lived inside the pain, the fear that God was not listening, began to loosen its grip. Margaret slept 4 hours without waking. She had not slept 4 hours in one stretch in 11 years. On the third night, Margaret said the prayer again before sleep. On the seventh night, she noticed the fear had grown quieter still, even though the pain in her legs remained. On the 14th night, she went to evening mass at St. Catherine and managed to stand through most of the liturgy of the Eucharist, something she had not been able to do in a long time. She continued seeing her doctor and taking her medication exactly as prescribed. Nothing about her treatment changed. What had changed, she told her daughter, was how alone she felt inside the pain. Margaret called Father Barrett and said, "I have been praying my whole life, Father, but I had never prayed that prayer. I had never stopped asking God to fix me and simply asked him to be with me in what I could not fix. And when I finally asked him that way, I stopped feeling so alone." Helen Carter was 69 years old and lived in Dayton, Ohio. She had suffered from migraines for 16 years. The migraines came 3 to 4 times a week. She had tried every medication her neurologist prescribed. She prayed novenas. She attended healing masses. Nothing stopped the migraines. A friend from her parish told her about Father Barrett and what he had shared with Margaret Sullivan. Helen called him. Father Barrett visited her home and shared the prayer with her. Helen said it that night when a migraine began at 11 o'clock. She continued taking her prescribed medication without any change. Over the following weeks, she noticed she was spending less energy dreading the migraines and more able to rest through them when they came. Her neurologist noted she seemed calmer and less anxious at her appointments. Helen said, "I spent 16 years asking God to take away my migraines. I never once asked him to simply help me through them. The moment I stopped demanding that he remove the pain and instead asked him to be with me in it, something in me settled." Robert Finley was 73 years old and lived in Cincinnati. He had chronic arthritis in both knees. He had been unable to kneel at Mass for 9 years. He prayed the rosary every morning, sitting in a chair. A deacon at his parish heard about the prayer from another priest and shared it with Robert. Robert said the prayer every night before sleep for 1 week, alongside his usual treatment. On the 8th day, he tried kneeling at Mass during the consecration. He managed to stay kneeling for a few minutes, the first time in 9 years. He continued saying the prayer and continued his physical therapy exactly as before. Robert wrote to Father Barrett and said, "I thought kneeling was gone from my life forever. I'm not sure whether anything changed in my knees or just in my willingness to try. But the moment I stopped only asking him to heal me so I could kneel again, and instead asked him to help me offer my suffering while I couldn't, something opened up in me. The pattern across these 3 lives is this: each person had prayed faithfully for years. Each person had asked God to remove their suffering. And each person experienced a shift, mostly spiritual, sometimes accompanied by small, ordinary changes in rest or mood, in the season after they stopped asking God only to take away the unbearable pain, and began also asking him to be present within it. John Paul II understood unbearable suffering in a way that few public figures have. He carried serious suffering in the final years of his life. His body failed him publicly. His voice weakened. His hands shook. And yet he did not ask to be hidden from it. He bore his suffering visibly because he believed suffering offered to God in a way that echoes how Christ offered his suffering on the cross can become redemptive, not only for the one who suffers, but for the whole church. In Salvifici Doloris, he wrote that suffering, when united with the suffering of Christ, takes on a new depth of meaning and becomes a share in the mystery of redemption. He did not write, that this removes pain. He wrote that it can transform what the pain means. The prayer is rooted in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verse 46. Christ is on the cross. His body is broken. His breath is failing. And he does not say, "Father, take away this pain." He says, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." This is a prayer of complete surrender. It acknowledges that suffering has reached the limit of what the soul can carry alone, and that the only way forward is to place everything, the pain, the fear, the unanswered questions, into the hands of God. John Paul II believed that a soul who prays this way in the midst of suffering participates in some real way in the suffering of Christ himself, and that this can become a form of intercession for others. St. Paul wrote in Colossians chapter 1 verse 24 that he was completing in his own flesh what was still lacking in the afflictions of Christ for the sake of the church. John Paul II believed that offering unbearable suffering to God through this kind of prayer can turn it into an act of love for others, not only a private burden. St. Faustina Kowalska, whose writings on divine mercy were close to John Paul II's heart, wrote in her diary about the deep value of suffering united to God in trust. John Paul II canonized her in the year 2000. Both of them understood something similar. Unbearable suffering is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It can become, if you choose to offer it, a way of joining yourself to his work of love, even when the suffering itself does not go away. Before you receive the full prayer, it helps to name two things that can quietly get in the way of surrender. The first is the belief that you must understand why God allowed your suffering before you can hand it over to him. You have carried pain for years and asked God 1,000 times why he has not taken it away. You have asked what you did wrong, what sin you committed, what failure of faith caused him to allow this. And because you have not received an answer, you have held something back. You have said, in effect, "God, I will trust you with my suffering if you first explain why I am suffering." Surrender does not require that you understand your suffering first. It only asks that you trust God is with you in it, even when you do not understand it. Patricia Reynolds was 70 years old and lived in Cleveland. She had suffered from chronic pain in her shoulders for 12 years. She prayed every day for healing. She asked God every night why he had allowed this pain to continue when she had been faithful her entire life. She heard about this prayer from a priest during a retreat. Every time she tried to pray it, she stopped herself and said, "God, I need to know why before I can give this to you." One night, her sister visited and said, "Patty, you've been asking why for 12 years. What if God is waiting for you to say instead, 'I trust you even though I don't know why'?" That night, Patricia prayed without asking why first. She said, "Father, into your hands I give this pain, even though I do not understand it." She did not experience a sudden physical change, but she noticed the tightness of fear around the pain ease a little, and she slept more peacefully than she had in a long while. She kept every one of her medical appointments and made no changes to her treatment. To try this yourself, before you say the full prayer tonight, say aloud, "God, I do not need to understand why I am suffering. I only need to know that you are with me." Say it once, then move into the prayer. The second obstacle is the belief that if you stop asking God to remove your suffering, you are giving up. You have been taught that faith means persistence, that you must keep asking until God answers. And so you have prayed the same prayers over and over, asking God to heal you, to fix you, to take away the pain so you can go back to the life you had before. What John Paul II's own witness suggests is this: there can come a point where continuing to ask only for the cross to be removed keeps you from receiving what God may be offering instead, the strength to carry it, and the sense that you are not carrying it alone. Stephen Hughes was 68 years old and lived in Toledo, Ohio. He had been suffering from back pain for 14 years. He prayed every single morning for God to heal his back so he could return to work, play with his grandchildren, feel normal again. A friend told him about Father Barrett and the prayer. Stephen resisted. He said, "If I stop asking God to heal me, then I'm accepting that I'll be in pain forever." His friend said, "Stephen, you've been in pain for 14 years while asking God to heal you. What if he's waiting for you to ask him for something different?" Stephen finally agreed to try. He said the prayer that night. He did not ask God to heal his back. He asked God to help him carry his back pain in a way that brought him closer to God, whatever the pain's course turned out to be. He kept up his usual care and did not stop or change any treatment. Over the following weeks, he noticed the fear that had lived inside the pain begin to loosen. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled him the way it once had. To try this yourself, before you say the full prayer tonight, say aloud, "God, I am not giving up. I am asking you to help me carry what I cannot carry alone." Say it once, then move into the prayer. How much longer will you wake at night feeling that your prayers are hitting a wall between you and God? How much longer will you carry unbearable suffering alone, believing that faithfulness means enduring in silence when Christ himself cried out on the cross and placed everything in the Father's hands? John Paul II understood exactly what you are feeling in this moment. He carried his own serious suffering through the final years of his life, and he did not hide it. He offered it publicly because he believed suffering united to the cross of Christ becomes a powerful form of love for others. He prayed through suffering that would have broken most people, and what he lived through can still speak to you tonight. If you are someone who has been faithful for years and who now feels at the edge of what you can carry alone. In the final years of his life, as Parkinson's disease made it harder for him to move, to hold the chalice steady, or even to speak his prepared homilies, those close to him said there was a peace in his eyes that had not been there before, a peace that seemed to come not from the absence of suffering, but from having placed that suffering again and again into the hands of God. What you are about to pray tonight draws on that same act of trust. It is the prayer of the cross. Tonight, before you sleep, you will say this prayer aloud. Go to the place where you pray. If you have a crucifix, hold it in your hands. If you do not have a crucifix, place your hands over your heart. Sit or kneel, whichever your body allows. Close your eyes. Take 3 slow breaths, then say these words aloud. Father, into your hands I give this suffering that I cannot bear alone. I do not ask you only to take it away. I ask you to be with me in it. I offer this pain for my family, for the church, for everyone I have ever prayed for. I trust that you are with me even when I cannot feel you. I surrender everything into your hands. Say it slowly. Say it once. Then sit in silence for 1 full minute. Do not ask for anything else. Do not add more words. Simply rest in the surrender you have just made. This prayer does not promise that heaven will remove your suffering tonight. What it offers is this: the grace to carry what you could not carry alone, a peace that can come not from the absence of pain, but from the presence of God within it, the strength to wake tomorrow and face another day, knowing you are not enduring in isolation, but offering your suffering as an act of love for the people you love and for the wider church. After you say the prayer tonight, you may want to keep saying it each night before sleep for the next several nights, alongside whatever medical care you are already receiving. Hold the crucifix or place your hands over your heart. Say the prayer aloud. Sit in silence for 1 minute. Rather than measuring whether the pain has lessened, notice instead whether the fear inside the pain has eased, whether you feel less alone in your suffering, whether something in your spirit has shifted even if nothing in your body has changed. Some people who pray this way notice a greater sense of peace within a week or 2. Others notice little at first and find the practice becomes more meaningful slowly over time. Both are honest outcomes, and neither means the prayer has failed. Margaret Sullivan said the prayer for many nights. Over that time, she noticed she was relying a little less on her fear of the pain and a little more on her sense that God was present with her in it. She eventually returned, in a limited way, to helping with the altar guild at St. Catherine, adjusting her role to what her body could manage. She continued her medical care exactly as her doctor advised throughout. She called Father Barrett one evening and said, "Father, I don't know if God is going to take this pain away, but I know this. I'm not as afraid of it anymore. And for me, that has been its own kind of grace." Tonight, before you sleep, you might choose to pray these words of surrender that John Paul II returned to again and again in his own suffering. You will say them aloud. You will hold a crucifix or place your hands over your heart. You will say, "Father, into your hands I give this suffering that I cannot bear alone." You will not ask God only to remove your pain. You will ask Him to be with you in it. You will offer your suffering as a prayer for your family and for the church. You will sit in silence for a minute afterward, and you can trust that when you stop asking God only to take away the cross and also ask Him to help you carry it, something in how you carry it can begin to change. John Paul II believed that when a soul offers unbearable suffering to God in surrender, using words that echo Christ's own words from the cross, that soul shares in Christ's redemptive work in a real, if mysterious way. He believed this prayer can transform suffering from a pure burden into an offering, one that becomes an act of love, not only for the one who prays it, but for everyone that person loves. There is likely someone in your life who has been carrying unbearable suffering alone, someone who has prayed for years without the relief she hoped for, someone who wakes at night feeling that God has stopped listening. She may be in your parish. She may be your daughter or your friend. She has done everything the church asked, and the pain has not stopped. She may want to hear what you just heard, that there is a way to pray that does not promise the pain will vanish, but that can help her feel less alone in carrying it. If this has helped you, sharing it with her is simply an act of care, not a demand.